Hello, and welcome to episode 39 of Sir Astro's Star Wars Legion painting series. In this video I'm going to be revisiting my old ATST, which I painted 7 years ago, and giving it a painting makeover. I'm doing this partly to ensure that both the basing and overall ambience fits the theme of my new Galactic Empire army, which is set in an Outer Rim, Tatooine-style environment. I also felt that with the skills I've gained as a painter over the last few years, I might be able to approach the model with a bit more courage and vision, and hopefully have some techniques and ideas that you might find useful if you're painting something similar. Let's begin. The first thing I've done is to provide some rocky desert-style basing as detailed in my recent Stormtrooper video, using some basing paste and modelling sand, which I'm now just sealing in place with some thinned Mod Podge. I also embedded some spare bits of plastic to subtly indicate the firing arcs. Reflecting on the original paint job, whilst the model looks perfectly fine on the tabletop and is reasonably screen accurate, I feel it's lacking in contrast, colour interest and character. So the first thing I've chosen to do is provide a dark oil wash to achieve some greater depth in the recesses. To do that, I'm using a mix of Ivory Black and Burnt Umber by Windsor and Newton, thinned with an appropriate thinner from the art shop. I'm not especially experienced with oil paints, so I'm kind of feeling my way here, but I want the wash to be pretty dark, so I'm aiming not to over-thin the paint. I'm starting on the left leg to test things out, and I ended up covering the whole structure. I'm now using a soft makeup sponge to gently wipe the paint off the flat and raised surfaces, using mainly a downward motion. And I'm doing the same for the rest of the model. Once dry enough, we can go in with some more focused shading in some of the recesses to really max out the depth. I'm now happy I've got the desired depth in the shadows, but want to lighten the overall tone of the panels. I'd also like to shift into a much warmer grey tone to better suit the Tatooine-like setting. So I've decided to use a mix of warm grey and khaki, which I'll be applying with the airbrush, although a large flat or dry brush would also be okay. I'm first mixing my desired tone before thinning the paint using water mixed with a little flow enhancer. We can then apply this from a roughly overhead angle so as to begin building up some broad zenithal style highlights, whilst also avoiding the areas of recess and shadow. You can see I've masked off the ground with some low-tack masking tape. I'm now lightening the mix with some additional khaki and continuing to build up the values. You might be able to achieve some gentle gradients here. This is now pretty much pure khaki, which I'm reserving for the brighter areas. I then went back and forth a little between adding some additional shading to some of the more grimy recesses, and a final push of the highlights with the airbrush. For these brightest highlights, I'm using a mix of khaki and bright warm grey. And before moving on to the weathering, I chose to provide a coat of gloss varnish to allow me to play around with the oil paints with a little more confidence without worrying too much about lifting the paint from the surface of the panels. For the weathering, I'm starting with some regular acrylics, and will initially be using a piece of sponge to add some chipping and random specks of noise. Any very dark brown or black would be fine for this. Naturally, I'm hitting the edges the hardest, but also adding small flecks or chips elsewhere. Notice I'll frequently rotate the sponge and also swap it to a different piece regularly in order to avoid creating similar looking markings. I'm now going in with the brush to add plenty of dark chipped edges. With a light coloured model like this, creating dark edges can actually provide more contrast than using standard light edge highlighting. I might use a black pencil for some of this, especially for edges that might be hard to get to with the brush. And if you go too far with the sponge, we can always reapply some of the panel tone. I'm now returning to the oil paint to add various grime effects. I'm sticking with just 3 colours: burnt sienna, burnt umber and ivory black, which I'll be freely mixing to create a range of tones. To create some attractive streaking effects, I'm first adding small dabs of quite concentrated paint where I want the streaks to begin. One option is to then use a dry flat brush and gently pull the paint down over the surface of the panel, aiming to keep things as straight and vertical as possible. This might be somewhat hit and miss, but the useful thing about oil paints is how long they take to dry, so we have all the time in the world to use a brush dampened with thinner to reshape, elongate, or simply erase the streak as you like. Another option is to use a regular brush, once again dampened with thinner, to draw out the paint in a more controlled fashion. I'm freely playing around with both approaches, whilst also varying the tone, length and intensity of the streaks. Here once again you can see me straightening out this one with a damper brush. I'm also thinning some burnt sienna right down to create a thin rust-coloured filter, and I'm applying this quite freely to random patches of the vehicle. We can also use the black to create some heavily weathered areas of oil or soot. I applied this quite generously to these vents at the back using a large dry brush. I'm also hitting random parts of the vehicle elsewhere to suggest a bit of fire or battle damage, or to reinforce the dark chipped edges. I'm now continuing to build up the streaking effects. To push the overall contrast levels up a notch, I'm now returning to add a few rough highlights with the brush. Using an even lighter mix with the addition of some white, I'm now adding some tiny specks of highlight around the edges of some of the dark chipping. This can create an almost 3D or relief-like effect. I also really like the volumes of the feet, so I spent a little time giving them some additional highlights. I'm now just refining the base a little. And after giving the rim a fresh coat of black, I'm spraying the whole model with some ultra matte varnish. And this completes my makeover of the ATST. Thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you found the video useful. As usual, you'll find a full product list in the video description, along with links to all of the places that can be found online. My very special thanks go out to my amazing patrons for supporting this work. If you'd like to help me keep going, feel free to hit the Patreon link and pledge what you can. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Star Wars Legion. Happy painting!